My name is Evan, and for a long time I believed that some people were simply born lucky in love, that they stumbled into it effortlessly, like finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk without even looking down. But life has a way of teaching you that even the brightest smiles can hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes the people you think are your greatest blessings are actually the storms you never see coming until you're already standing in the wreckage they leave behind. I met Sienna on a rainy Wednesday evening when the city streets were slick with reflections of neon signs, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and broken promises, and she appeared in my life as suddenly and as beautifully as a song you forgot you loved playing softly on an old radio. She was sitting alone at the end of a quiet little diner tucked between a pawn shop and a boarded-up bookstore, staring out the window like she was waiting for something or someone, or maybe nothing at all, and when our eyes met across the room it felt like the world tilted slightly on its axis, just enough to make me stumble without moving an inch. I didn't mean to approach her, didn't plan to strike up a conversation with a stranger, but something about her sadness pulled me in like gravity, and before I knew it, I was sliding into the booth across from her, asking if she minded some company, and when she smiled, it was a sad kind of smile, the kind that makes you want to build a fortress around a person just to keep the world from hurting them again. We talked for hours that night over lukewarm coffee and pie that tasted like nostalgia, and she told me little things about herself in that careful, guarded way people do when they've been hurt too many times and don't know whether you'll be gentle with the pieces they're offering or shatter them without a second thought. She said she had just moved to the city from a small coastal town in Maine, chasing dreams that no longer fit neatly into the life she had outgrown, and when she spoke about the ocean, it was with a longing that made me ache for places I had never been and lives I had never lived. I told her about my job at a local design firm, about how I sometimes wondered if I was wasting my life chasing deadlines that no one would remember, and about how I used to think love would just happen to me without effort the way it does in movies until reality taught me otherwise. We exchanged numbers before parting ways under the dripping awning outside, and as she walked away into the misty darkness, something inside me whispered that nothing would ever be the same again, and I believed it without question, without fear, because sometimes the heart hears things the mind is too tired to argue with. Over the next few weeks, Sienna and I fell into a rhythm that felt almost too easy, too perfect, like a dream you don't want to wake up from, because the real world outside the covers is colder and lonelier than anything you're ready to face, and every time we met it was like slipping into a secret universe that belonged only to us, where time moved slower and the noise of the city faded into nothing but background hums and whispered promises. We spent long, lazy afternoons wandering through flea markets and abandoned art galleries tucked into forgotten alleyways, and she showed me parts of the city I had lived in for years but never really seen, like someone who had been colorblind their whole life and suddenly stumbled into a world painted in vibrant, reckless strokes. She told me stories about her childhood growing up near the sea, about building forts out of driftwood and pretending she could speak to the dolphins, and even though her eyes always lit up when she spoke, there was a heaviness in her voice, sometimes like the ocean she loved so much had taken more from her than it had given, and she had never fully forgiven it. I didn't push when she got quiet, didn't pry when she changed the subject, because there was something sacred about the spaces between her words, and I didn't want to be the person who broke her open just to satisfy my own curiosity, and so I waited, hoping that in time she would trust me with the pieces she kept hidden behind that fragile smile. Some nights she would call me out of the blue, her voice trembling slightly like she was standing on the edge of something she wasn't ready to name, and she would ask me to meet her somewhere, anywhere, and I always said yes without hesitation, because there was something about her that made me feel like whatever demons she was fighting, I could help her slay them if she would only let me. Those nights were my favorite, even when they were soaked in sadness, because sitting beside her in the dark, sharing silent glances and broken jokes, felt more real, more intimate than any perfect candlelit dinner ever could, and I found myself falling for her, not in the slow, tentative way I usually did, but in the kind of free fall that leaves you breathless and terrified and exhilarated all at once. I didn't care that I barely knew her past, didn't care that sometimes her stories didn't quite add up, or that she avoided certain topics like landmines hidden beneath her laughter, because love isn't always logical, and sometimes you fall hardest for the people who wear their scars like armor and dare you to love them anyway. It wasn't until one chilly evening in late October, when the city was draped in early twilight and the sidewalks were littered with brittle leaves, that I realized something about Sienna didn't just feel mysterious in a romantic storybook way, but carried with it the weight of real shadows, the kind that stretch longer the closer you get to the light. And it started small, almost imperceptibly, like how sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, she would flinch at sudden noises, or how her smile would falter when certain songs played on the radio, as if some invisible hand had reached out of nowhere and yanked her back into a memory she didn't want to relive. We were sitting at a little dive bar that night, a place with peeling paint and Christmas lights strung up year-round, and she seemed restless, tapping her fingers against her glass, staring past me like she was searching for something just out of reach, and I asked if she was okay. Because even though part of me knew she wasn't, I still clung to the hope that whatever was haunting her was something I could protect her from if she would only let me. She shook her head and smiled, that tired, broken smile, and told me not to worry, that sometimes her mind just got stuck in places she didn't like to visit, but she would always find her way back, and I wanted to believe her, wanted so badly to believe that all she needed was time and patience and love. But somewhere deep inside, a voice I tried hard to ignore whispered that there are some battles people have to fight alone, no matter how badly you want to stand beside them. When I walked her home that night, she clung to my arm tighter than usual, and when we reached her door, she kissed me with a desperation that tasted like goodbye, and it scared me more than anything, because it felt like she was trying to memorize me, like she wasn't sure she would get another chance, and I held her tighter, hoping that if I loved her hard enough, it would be enough to anchor her here with me. But love isn't a life raft, and sometimes no matter how hard you hold on, people still drift away, carried by currents you can't see and storms you can't fight. And as I watched her disappear behind that door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, something precious and fragile, and already halfway gone before I even had the chance to save it. The days that followed felt strange in a way I couldn't quite name, because Sienna was still there, still answering my calls, still meeting me for coffee and late-night walks, but there was a distance growing between us, like a crack in the glass you can pretend not to see until the first real pressure makes it shatter completely. And even though she smiled and laughed and held my hand like nothing had changed, I could feel it in the way her gaze drifted too often to the door or the windows, as if she was waiting for someone or something to find her. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking things, because I had fallen harder and faster than I ever had before, and sometimes when you love someone too much, you start seeing threats where there are none. But every time I tried to silence the doubts, they only screamed louder, in the quiet moments between her kisses, in the lingering sadness behind her laughter, in the way she sometimes pulled away from my touch like a ghost she didn't know how to explain. One evening after a long day at work, I stopped by her apartment unannounced with takeout, and a stupid grin on my face, excited to surprise her, because that's what love looks like, sometimes small, unexpected kindnesses. But when I knocked, there was no answer, and when I tried calling, her phone rang from somewhere inside her apartment, not on her, but left carelessly behind, like a piece of clothing someone forgets to take with them when they run. I stood there for a long time, feeling foolish and exposed, and more afraid than I wanted to admit, because something deep inside me knew that this wasn't a simple missed call or a change of plans. It was the beginning of something much worse and much heavier than anything I had been willing to imagine. Later that night, when she finally called back, she sounded breathless and rushed, apologizing profusely, saying she had gone for a walk and left her phone by accident, and everything inside me wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the version of her I had built in my mind. But the part of me that had learned the hard way about the quiet ways people can betray you whispered that love without trust isn't love at all. It's a slow, beautiful disaster you keep pretending you can fix until all you're left holding is the wreckage. I told her it was fine, told her I understood, but even as the words left my mouth, they tasted like lies, because trust once cracked is never quite whole again, no matter how carefully you try to mend it, and deep down I knew that whatever storm was coming, I wasn't ready for it, and maybe I never would be. A few nights later, I found myself standing outside that same diner where we had first met, the neon sign buzzing overhead like some tired heartbeat, and the rain falling in lazy sheets across the pavement, and I waited because she had asked me to meet her there, said she had something important to tell me, something she couldn't explain over the phone, and even though every instinct in me screamed that I should run, that I should protect whatever pieces of myself I still had left, I stayed, because sometimes love makes you foolish in ways you don't even recognize until it's too late to pull yourself back. She arrived late, wrapped in a long coat, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks, and there was something wild in her eyes, something desperate that made my stomach twist into knots, because I knew before she even spoke that whatever she was about to say was going to change everything. We sat across from each other at a booth in the back, the same one where it all began, but this time there were no shy smiles, no playful banter, just a heavy silence stretched so tight between us it felt like it might snap at any second, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. She told me there were things about her I didn't know, things she hadn't been ready to share when we first met, things she had hoped she could outrun or bury beneath this new life we were building together. But the past has a cruel way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury it, and she said it was only fair that I knew before we went any further, before I built more dreams around someone who might not be able to give me the future I deserved. I listened, trying to keep my face neutral even as my heart pounded against my ribs, because part of me already knew this wasn't going to be some small secret easily forgiven and forgotten. This was going to be something heavy, something that would sit between us like a third presence in every room we ever entered together. She told me she hadn't just moved to the city for a fresh start. She had left because of something she had done, something she regretted, something that had broken more than just her own heart. And even though she didn't go into detail, even though she chose her words carefully, enough to leave the worst parts in shadow, I understood enough to know that the woman sitting across from me wasn't just running from a place, she was running from herself. And no matter how much she wanted to be someone new, some ghost refused to let go. I sat there staring at her across the cracked vinyl booth, feeling like the ground beneath me was shifting in slow, inevitable ways, and even though every logical part of my brain screamed that this was my chance to walk away, to save myself from the fallout of someone else's mistakes, I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except reach across the table and take her trembling hand in mine, because love isn't always about logic or self-preservation. Sometimes it's about choosing the broken pieces even when you know they might cut you, and I needed to understand, I needed to hear the whole truth before I decided if I could live with the ghost she carried. She squeezed my hand back, tears brimming in her eyes, but refusing to fall, as she told me about the life she had left behind, a small town tangled in old secrets and older grudges, about a relationship that had gone so wrong, so violently toxic, that by the time she finally escaped, it wasn't just her heart that was broken, it was her sense of who she was and what she deserved, and in her desperation to reclaim some shred of control over her life, she had made a decision that cost her everything she once knew. She didn't tell me exactly what she had done, and I didn't press her because some wounds are too raw to be dragged into the light all at once, but I understood enough to know that she wasn't the villain in her story. She was the survivor of a war most people never saw. And the fact that she could still laugh, still dream, still love was a kind of quiet rebellion against the pain that had tried to define her. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to feel betrayed for the months she had hidden this from me, but all I could feel was this overwhelming, aching tenderness for the girl who had carried so much alone for so long and still had the courage to lay her shattered pieces at my feet, trusting that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't run. I told her I wasn't going anywhere, not tonight, not tomorrow, not until she told me to. And even though part of me knew that loving someone with that much darkness in their past was never going to be easy or simple, I also knew that real love, the kind that scars you in beautiful ways, isn't built in the easy chapters. It's forged in the moments when you choose each other over and over, even when it would be easier to walk away. She smiled, then really smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks, and when she leaned across the table to kiss me, it was soft and broken and desperate and perfect, because it wasn't the kiss of two people falling in love, it was the kiss of two people choosing to love each other despite the wreckage they carried inside. The weeks that followed weren't easy, because love, no matter how fierce, can't erase the scars people carry inside them, and there were days when the weight of Sienna's past pulled her under so deeply that I could only sit beside her in silence, offering the kind of presence that asks for nothing in return and prays that somehow it's enough. And there were nights when she would wake gasping from dreams she wouldn't speak of, curling into herself like a wounded animal, and all I could do was hold her and whisper that she was safe, that she wasn't alone anymore, even though I knew safety is a fragile illusion when the wounds run that deep. We built our life together, slowly, carefully, like two survivors scavenging beauty from the wreckage around them, and for a while it was enough to simply exist in the same space, breathing the same air, laughing at bad sitcoms and burning pancakes on lazy Sunday mornings, pretending that the world beyond our little bubble couldn't touch us if we just held on tightly enough. I watched her start to heal in small, imperceptible ways, the way her laughter grew louder and less brittle, the way her eyes stopped scanning every room for exits, the way she began to speak about the future not with fear, but with a kind of tentative hope, and I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we had outrun the shadows that chased her. Maybe love really was enough if you fought hard enough for it. But healing isn't a straight line, and sometimes the past doesn't haunt you with screams, it haunts you with whispers, slipping into your happiest moments and poisoning them before you even realize it's happening. And no matter how much light we built between us, the darkness still found ways to creep back and around the edges. I first noticed it in the small things, the sudden guarded looks when her phone buzzed late at night, the way she would slip outside to take certain calls, the way she started offering vague explanations for where she had been or why she was late, and each time I told myself not to panic, not to fall into the old trap of suspicion, because she had trusted me with her truth, and I owed her the same faith in return. But trust once broken even by someone else's hand is like a cracked window. It might hold for a while, but eventually the pressure finds the weakness and shatters it. And no matter how much you want to pretend, you can't feel the cold air creeping, and eventually you have to admit that something fundamental has shifted, and no amount of love can make it whole again. It all came to a head one cold gray evening in late March when the sky hung heavy and low over the city and the streets shimmered with that peculiar dampness that seems to seep into your bones and stay there long after the rain stops, and I found myself standing once again outside Sienna's apartment, heart pounding against my ribs and frantic uneven beats, because deep down I already knew that whatever truth waited for me on the other side of that door, it wasn't going to be the kind you walk away from unchanged. She opened the door slowly, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed like she had been fighting some internal battle long before I arrived, and for a moment neither of us spoke, just stared at each other across the threshold of what used to be a safe place but now felt like a war zone littered with invisible landmines waiting to detonate. I stepped inside and she closed the door behind me, the click sounding too final, too heavy, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked like dry earth after a long drought, and she told me that she had made a mistake, not the kind you can fix with apologies and promises, but the kind that redefines everything that came before and everything that might come after. She had reconnected with someone from her past, someone she swore. She had cut ties with someone whose grip on her wasn't born out of love, but out of guilt and fear and unfinished business. And in a moment of weakness, in a moment of loneliness, she had answered a call she never should have answered, opened a door she should have left closed, and though she insisted it hadn't gone further than words, the betrayal hung in the air between us, thicker and heavier than any confession of physical infidelity could have been, because emotional betrayals, the ones that happen in secret, unspoken spaces, often hurt more deeply than anything you can see with your eyes. I wanted to scream, to rage, to ask her how she could look me in the eye and swear she loved me while leaving the back door to her heart cracked open for someone else. But all I could do was stand there, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat and wondering how something that had once felt so inevitable, so fated, could unravel so quickly into something I barely recognized. She begged me to understand, told me it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, not a reflection of how she felt about me, and maybe part of me wanted to believe her, because walking away from someone you love isn't just about rejecting them. It's about rejecting the future you built together and admitting that no matter how tightly you held on, it was never enough to keep the darkness out. I stood there for what felt like hours, caught in that endless moment between past and future, between forgiveness and goodbye. And as much as every part of me wanted to reach for her, to pull her into my arms and pretend that love alone could erase the cracks that had formed between us, I knew deep down that love without trust is like building a house on sand. No matter how beautiful it looks from the outside, it will collapse the moment the storm comes. And the truth was, we had already been living inside a crumbling house for longer than either of us wanted to admit. I told her I loved her because it was still true, because even in that moment of heartbreak and betrayal, a part of me would probably always love her. But I also told her that love isn't enough when it's built on fear and half-truths and silences thick with things left unsaid, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go before the hurt consumes everything good that ever existed between you. She cried, then really cried for the first time since I had known her, the kind of tears that shake your whole body, the kind that are born not just from grief, but from the terrible understanding that some mistakes carve scars too deep to ever fully heal. And even though every instinct in me screamed to stay, to comfort her, to be the man who chose forgiveness over pride, I forced myself to step back, to say goodbye, to walk away into the cold, brittle night, knowing that I wasn't just leaving her, I was leaving behind a version of myself that believed love could fix everything if you just wanted it badly enough. Healing didn't come quickly or easily. There were days when the loneliness felt like a second skin I couldn't shed, nights when the echoes of her laughter haunted the corners of my apartment, and mornings when waking up alone felt like a fresh wound. But somewhere along the way, I started to realize that survival isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about learning how to carry it with you without letting it define you. I traveled, I rebuilt, I found new pieces of myself in old forgotten passions and in quiet moments of unexpected joy. And though I still thought of her, sometimes not with bitterness, but with a kind of bittersweet gratitude for the lessons she taught me, I knew deep in my bones that I had made the right choice. Because real love, the kind that lasts, isn't just about passion and promises. It's about honesty and trust and the courage to stand in the light, even when it's easier to hide in the shadows. And One day when I least expected it, I looked in the mirror and saw someone whole and strong and unafraid staring back at me, and I realized that sometimes losing the person you thought you couldn't live without is exactly what saves you in the end.